She married him for survival. He married her for obsession. 6 months into a marriage built on silence and secrets, Emma Vale discovers the man she calls husband didn't find her by accident. He engineered every broken piece of her life to bring her closer. Now standing in a Manhattan art gallery where her past just collided with her present, Emma must decide. Run from the most dangerous man in New York, or trust the only person who has ever refused to let her fall. But in Lucien Moretti's world, love and destruction wear the same face. And tonight, the mask is about to come off. If this story satisfies your soul, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now settle in. This one burns slow and cuts deep. The champagne was too warm. That was the first thing Emma Vale noticed. Not the 18-foot ceilings dripping with crystal chandeliers. Not the obscene flower arrangements that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to. Not the parade of silk dresses and Swiss watches circling the gallery like sharks in formal wear. The champagne was too warm, and the glass was sweating in her palm, and she was gripping it so tight her knuckles had gone white because if she let go of anything right now, anything at all, she was going to fall apart in front of 300 people who would enjoy watching it happen. The Whitfield Gallery occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse in Chelsea, all exposed brick and polished concrete and enormous canvases splashed with colors that rich people pretended to understand. Emma understood them. She'd studied art for 4 years at NYU before life rearranged her priorities with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. She knew the difference between technique and pretension, between a painting that bled truth and one that existed solely to match someone's living room furniture. Tonight, she didn't care about any of it. She was here because Lucian's lawyer had called that afternoon and said it would be beneficial for appearances if she attended. Something about maintaining the illusion of a functional marriage for certain business associates who would be present. She'd almost said no. She'd been saying no to most things lately. Dinner invitations, social events, anything that required her to pretend she was something other than what she actually was. A woman married to a ghost. 6 months. That's how long she'd worn the ring on her left hand. A band of platinum so thin and elegant it barely registered as jewelry. No diamond, no flash. Lucien had offered her something from Cartier, something that would have made tabloid photographers lose their minds, but she'd refused. The platinum band was enough, more than enough. It was already the heaviest thing she'd ever carried. She took a sip of the warm champagne and immediately regretted it. Too sweet. Everything in this world was too sweet on the surface and rotten underneath. Emma? Emma Vale? The voice hit her like a slap. She knew it before she turned. Knew it the way your body knows the sound of a car crash. Not with recognition, but with dread, cellular and absolute. The kind that locks your joints and floods your throat with something metallic. Preston Hale stood 12 feet away, holding a glass of scotch like it was a scepter, surrounded by 3 men in suits who looked like they'd been manufactured in the same factory of entitlement and hair gel. He was grinning. That grin. The one she used to find charming before she understood it was just the expression his face made before it hurt someone. "It is you," Preston said, stepping forward. His shoes clicked against the polished concrete like a countdown. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look different." Different. The word was a scalpel. She knew what he meant. He meant smaller. He meant diminished. He meant the version of Emma Vale who used to walk into rooms like she belonged in, them had been replaced by someone who hugged walls and nursed warm champagne and flinched at the sound of her own former name. Preston. She said it flat. No warmth. No panic. Just the word, dropped between them like a stone. God, it's been what? 3 years? He turned to his companions with the practiced ease of a man who had never once questioned whether he was the most important person in any room. "This is Emma. We were engaged. What was it, 2 years?" 2.5, Emma said quietly. Right. 2.5 years. He sipped his scotch. Before things didn't work out. Didn't work out. That was his version. Sanitized, polished, stripped of every ugly detail. The screaming matches at 2 a.m, the way he'd dismantled her self-worth piece by piece, like a man disassembling a clock just to prove he could. The final night when he'd told her she was fundamentally unlovable, and walked out while she sat on the kitchen floor unable to breathe. Didn't work out. I heard you moved downtown, Preston continued, circling closer. Someone said you were doing, what was it, freelance design work? Graphic design, she said. Right, graphic design. The way he said it made it sound like she'd told him she collected aluminum cans for a living. Well, good for you. Keeping busy. One of his companions, a thick-necked man with a Rolex the size of a doorknob, leaned in and murmured something. Preston laughed. Oh, that's right. I almost forgot. Preston's eyes dropped to her left hand, to the platinum band. Someone told me you got married. Is that true? The gallery noise seemed to dim. Emma felt the attention of nearby clusters shifting, the way bodies orient toward the promise of spectacle. Yes, she said. To whom? She hesitated. That hesitation was a mistake, and she knew it even as it happened. In Preston's world, hesitation was blood in the water. Lucien Moretti, she said. Preston's eyebrows lifted. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, sharp and ugly, the kind that carries across a room. Lucien Moretti, he repeated, loud enough for the surrounding clusters to hear. The Lucien Moretti, the one they write about in those conspiracy blogs? He turned to his companions again, visibly delighted. She says she married Lucien Moretti. The thick-necked man smirked. Nobody's ever even confirmed that guy exists. Oh, he exists, Preston said. He's just, come on, Emma. That's like saying you married Batman. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a volume that was still perfectly audible to everyone within 15 feet. Look, I get it. After everything that happened between us, you probably needed something to make yourself feel relevant again. But you don't have to invent a husband, especially not one that ridiculous. Emma's hand was shaking. The champagne trembled in the glass, tiny concentric circles rippling outward like aftershocks. She could feel the heat crawling up her neck, the familiar paralysis that Preston had always been able to trigger, that specific cocktail of shame and fury that locked her voice in her chest and left her standing there, mute, while he carved her open in public. I'm not inventing anything, she managed. Sure. Preston smiled, patronizing, final. Whatever helps you sleep at night. He turned away, dismissed her. The way he'd always dismissed her, completely, without effort, as if she were a thought he'd already finished having. Emma set the champagne glass on the nearest surface and walked toward the exit. Her heels clicked too fast against the concrete. She could feel eyes on her, dozens of them. The gallery was a fishbowl, and she was the thing thrashing against the glass. The night air hit her like a wall of cold water when she pushed through the gallery doors. Chelsea in October. Sharp wind, the smell of wet concrete and exhaust, traffic noise rushing in to fill the silence her humiliation had left behind. She walked fast, no direction, just away, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders, her breath coming in shallow bursts that were dangerously close to sobs. She made it half a block before she had to stop, leaned against a streetlight, pressed her palms flat against her thighs and forced herself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way her therapist had taught her 3 years ago, before she couldn't afford therapy anymore. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. She pulled it out with trembling fingers. The screen glowed in the dark. One message. No name. Just a number she'd memorized but never saved, because saving it felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. The message read, "Where are you?" 3 words. No punctuation, no greeting. Lucien Moretti communicated the way he did everything, with terrifying efficiency. She typed back, "Outside the gallery. I'm leaving." The response came in 4 seconds. "Stay where you are." Emma stared at the screen. Her instinct was to argue, to tell him she didn't need rescuing, didn't need anyone, could handle Preston Hale and his smirking friends and the whole rotten ecosystem of Manhattan wealth without help. But the truth was simpler and uglier than that. She was tired. Tired of pretending she was fine. Tired of being small. Tired of standing in rooms full of people who had more money than empathy and performing a version of herself that had never existed in the first place. She stayed where she was. The convoy appeared 3 minutes later. 3 black SUVs, moving in formation, sliding through the Chelsea traffic with the kind of fluid precision that made other drivers pull to the side instinctively. They didn't honk, didn't flash lights, just materialized, dark and gleaming, pulling to the curb in front of Emma like predators arriving at a feeding ground. The rear door of the middle vehicle opened. Lucien Moretti stepped out. Emma had seen him exactly 4 times since their wedding, a courthouse ceremony that lasted 11 minutes and involved no guests, no flowers, no kiss. Each time, the effect was the same. Not attraction, exactly. Something more primal. Something that lived in the part of her brain responsible for recognizing threats. He was tall, not dramatically so, maybe 6'1", 6'2", but he carried his height the way certain men carry weapons, with awareness, with intent. His suit was black, immaculately tailored, the kind of garment that cost more than a car and looked like it had been painted onto his body. His hair was dark, pushed back from a face that was handsome in the way a blade is handsome. Precise angles, sharp edges, nothing wasted on softness. But it was his eyes that made people stop. Dark, nearly black, and completely, unnervingly still. Lucien Moretti looked at people the way a surgeon looks at an incision site, with total focus and zero sentiment. Right now, those eyes were locked on Emma. He didn't speak. He crossed the sidewalk in 3 strides, placed his hand on the small of her back. Firm, possessive, the kind of touch that communicated ownership to anyone watching, and guided her toward the gallery entrance. Lucien, I don't want to go back in there. You're going back in. Preston is in there. I know what happened. His voice was low, calm, terrifyingly measured. You're going back in. With me. Why? He paused at the gallery door, looked down at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, something shifted behind his eyes. A crack in the glass, a glimpse of something hot and barely contained beneath the frozen surface. Because no one disrespects my wife, he said, and I don't handle things in private. He pushed the door open. The gallery was still buzzing when they entered, but the buzz changed pitch the moment Lucien crossed the threshold. Emma felt it, a ripple moving through the crowd, subtle but unmistakable, like the drop in air pressure before a storm. Conversation stuttered, heads turned, bodies shifted. People recognized him. Not everyone, maybe half the room. But the half that recognized Lucien Moretti were the ones who mattered. The ones whose names appeared on buildings and hospital wings and federal investigation files, and every single one of them looked afraid. Lucien walked Emma through the gallery with his hand still pressed against her lower back. He didn't hurry, didn't scan the room. He moved with the unhurried certainty of a man who had never in his life been in a room he didn't control. Preston was still holding court near the bar when he saw them. His scotch glass froze halfway to his mouth. Emma watched the recognition hit Preston's face in stages. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something rawer, something she'd never seen in his expression before, something that looked like animal terror. Lucien stopped 6 feet from Preston. The silence that fell was surgical, absolute. Even the bartender stopped moving. You must be Preston Hale, Lucien said. His voice carried without effort. My wife tells me you had something amusing to say about our marriage. Preston's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Listen, I'm not interested in what you didn't do. Lucien took a single step closer. I'm interested in what happens next. The thick-necked companion started to move forward. One of Lucien's security detail, a massive man who had appeared from nowhere, placed a hand on the companion's shoulder. Not forcefully, just enough. The companion sat down on a bar stool that hadn't been offered to him. I understand you and Emma have a history, Lucien continued, his tone conversational in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. That history is over permanently. If you speak to her again, at a gallery, at a restaurant, on a sidewalk, in a dream, you and I will have a different kind of conversation, the kind that doesn't happen in public. He paused. Are we clear? Preston's face had gone the color of old paper. We're clear. Good. Lucien placed his hand on Emma's waist. Enjoy your evening. He turned, walked Emma toward the far end of the gallery, didn't look back. Emma's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Her legs felt disconnected from her body, moving on autopilot while her mind raced through what had just happened. The entire exchange had lasted maybe 90 seconds. Preston Hale, The man who had made her feel invisible for 3 years had just been reduced to a stammering, pale-faced ghost by a man she'd married for money. No, not for money. For survival. That distinction mattered, even if she was the only one who understood it. Lucien guided her to a quiet corner of the gallery, away from the crowd, near a massive abstract painting that was all dark reds and violent blacks. He released her waist, stepped back, gave her space. "You're shaking," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're shaking and you've been crying." "I wasn't crying." "Your mascara is smudged under your left eye." She touched her face involuntarily. He was right. Of course he was right. Lucien Moretti noticed everything, cataloged everything, filed it away in whatever ruthless mental architecture ran behind those black eyes. "Thank you," she said. The words tasted strange. She wasn't sure she meant them. "Don't thank me." He adjusted his cufflink, a subtle, habitual motion she'd noticed during their few interactions. "That man won't bother you again." "You don't know that." "I do." The certainty in his voice was absolute, not boasting, not threatening, just stating a fact, the way someone might say the sun will rise tomorrow. Emma studied him. In the gallery light, the angles of his face were sharper than she remembered. There were faint shadows under his eyes that suggested he slept even less than she did. A thin scar crossed his left eyebrow. She hadn't noticed it before. Had it always been there? "Why did you come?" she asked. "You were at an event I should have attended. You were there alone. That was my oversight." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I have." She waited. He didn't elaborate. That was the thing about Lucien Moretti. He used words the way a miser used money, only when absolutely necessary, only in exact denominations. Everything else was silence and observation, and the silence was always heavier than whatever he might have said. "I want to go home," Emma said. "Which home?" The question stopped her. She had two, technically. The small studio apartment in Brooklyn that she'd been living in since the marriage, separate from Lucien, as their arrangement dictated, and the Moretti penthouse in Tribeca, which she'd visited exactly once for 20 minutes to sign documents. "My apartment," she said. He nodded, extended his arm toward the exit. "After you." The ride to Brooklyn was silent. Emma sat in the back of the SUV with Lucien beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and woody, expensive without being aggressive. A driver and a front-seat security operative occupied the front. Nobody spoke. The city scrolled past the tinted windows like a film she'd seen too many times. She stared at her reflection in the glass. Pale skin, dark circles, brown hair pulled into a twist that was already coming undone. She looked tired. She was tired. She'd been tired for 3 years, and the 6 months of marriage hadn't changed that. Had, if anything, added a new layer of exhaustion to the existing ones. "Your paintings," Lucien said, breaking the silence so suddenly that Emma flinched. "The ones you used to display in your old apartment. What happened to them?" She turned to look at him. "How do you know about my paintings?" "Answer the question." "I put them in storage." "Why?" "Because I couldn't afford to keep them anywhere else after the eviction." "That's the practical reason. What's the real one?" Emma felt something tighten in her chest. The real reason was uglier. The real reason was that Preston had stood in front of her largest painting, a mixed media piece she'd spent 4 months on, layers of acrylic and charcoal and torn paper that represented something she couldn't articulate in words, and told her it looked like something a child would make during a tantrum. She'd never looked at her work the same way after that. "They're not very good," she said. Lucien was quiet for a long moment, then, "You're wrong about that. You've never seen them." He didn't respond, just looked out his window at the Brooklyn Bridge lighting up the dark water below, and in the silence, Emma felt something cold move through her stomach. He knew about her paintings. He knew they existed, knew she used to display them, knew enough to ask about them specifically. The details of their arrangement had been clear. 2 years of marriage, separate lives, minimal contact. He wasn't supposed to know these things. He wasn't supposed to know anything about her beyond what the prenuptial documents contained. But Lucien Moretti, she was beginning to understand, did not limit himself to what he was supposed to know. The SUV pulled up in front of her Brooklyn walk-up. a five-story pre-war building with a crumbling facade and a buzzer system that worked about 60% of the time. It was objectively the last place anyone would expect the wife of Lucien Moretti to live, and that was exactly why she'd chosen it. "Thank you for the ride," she said, reaching for the door handle. "Emma," she stopped. "The arrangement we made," Lucien said, his voice careful, measured, each word selected like ammunition. "I want to renegotiate." "Renegotiate what?" "The terms. Specifically, the separation clause. We agreed to live separately. That was the deal. The deal was made under certain assumptions. Some of those assumptions have changed." "Changed how?" He turned to face her fully. In the dim interior of the SUV, his eyes caught the streetlight bleeding through the tinted glass, and for a moment they looked almost human, almost warm. "I'd like you to consider moving into the penthouse," he said. "Not as a requirement, as an option." "Why?" "Because after tonight, certain people know you exist. They know you're connected to me. Your current living situation offers no security. None. I've been fine here for 6 months. 6 months during which your connection to me was invisible. That invisibility ended tonight. You walked back into that gallery on my arm in front of 300 people, half of whom have reasons to either fear me or want something from me. Your name is now associated with mine publicly. That changes your risk profile considerably." Risk profile. He said it like he was discussing an investment portfolio, not her life. But underneath the clinical language, Emma detected something else. Something tight and controlled, like a man gripping a steering wheel too hard on black ice. "You're asking me to live with you," she said flatly. "I'm asking you to let me protect you. Those aren't the same thing. In my world, they are." She looked at him for a long time. The streetlight shifted as a truck rumbled past, and shadows moved across his face like weather. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take your time." A pause. But not too much time. She opened the door, stepped out into the cold. The SUV didn't pull away until she was inside the building, up the stairs, and had turned the deadbolt on her apartment door. She knew because she checked. He waited. Whatever else Luciana Moretti was, dangerous, obsessive, operating in a world she didn't understand, he waited until she was safe. Emma leaned against her apartment door and pressed her palms against her eyes. The apartment was small and dark, a railroad layout with a kitchen that doubled as a hallway and a bedroom window that faced a brick wall. She'd hung nothing on the walls. No photos, no art, nothing personal. She'd moved in 6 months ago with 2 suitcases and the unconscious intention of making the space as temporary-looking as possible, as if she might need to disappear at any moment, which, given her husband's line of work, wasn't entirely irrational. She kicked off her heels and sank onto the couch. The cushions were second-hand, bought from a guy on Craigslist who swore they came from a smoke-free home, despite the faint scent of menthol that still clung to the fabric. She pulled a blanket over her legs and stared at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen. "Lucien, lock the second deadbolt, the one at the top of the door." She stared at the message, turned to look at her front door. There were 2 deadbolts, one at standard height, one near the top that she never used because it was stiff and required both hands. He knew about the second deadbolt. He knew the layout of her apartment. She stood up, crossed the room, and locked the second deadbolt. Then she typed back, "Done." No response. She sat back on the couch, pulled the blanket tighter, and tried to catalog what she knew about the man she'd married. His name was Lucien Moretti. He was 36 years old, born in New York. Parents deceased. She didn't know how. He ran a vast network of businesses, some legitimate, many questionable, most invisible. The internet offered almost nothing about him. No social media, no press interviews, no public photographs. A few conspiracy blogs and organized crime forums mentioned his name, always in whispers, always accompanied by the kind of speculation that could either be paranoid fantasy or terrifying truth. He was wealthy beyond comprehension. That much was obvious from the penthouse, the convoy, the security detail, the way an entire gallery full of billionaires had gone silent at his entrance. He was also, she was increasingly certain, extremely dangerous. Not in the way Preston had been dangerous, petty, psychological, the cruelty of a small man who needed to diminish others to feel large. Lucien's danger was structural, architectural. built into the foundation of who he was, inseparable from his identity, the way a wolf's teeth are inseparable from its jaw. And yet, he'd come for her tonight, not because their arrangement required it, not because there was any contractual obligation to rescue her from an ex-boyfriend's cruelty. He'd come because she was upset, and he knew, and he'd showed up in 3 minutes flat with a convoy of armored vehicles and a level of quiet fury that had made Preston Hale look like a child caught stealing. Emma closed her eyes. 6 months ago, she'd been living in a one-bedroom apartment in the East Village. Not luxurious, but livable. The first space she'd felt was truly hers after leaving Preston. She'd painted there, cooked there, started rebuilding the version of herself that he'd demolished. Then the eviction notices started arriving. Building sold. New ownership. All tenants out within 60 days. She'd scrambled, applied to dozens of apartments, got rejected over and over. Credit issues, insufficient income, no consignor. The graphic design work was steady, but not enough, and her savings had been decimated by the breakup with Preston, who'd somehow ended up with most of their shared finances despite contributing none of the shared effort. Then the lawyer had appeared. A silver-haired man named Castellano, immaculate suit, soft voice, sitting across from her at a diner in the East Village like he belonged there, which he absolutely did not. "My client has a proposition," Castellano had said, sliding a manila envelope across the Formica table. "Who's your client?" "Mr. Lucien Moretti." "I don't know who that is." "That's by design. Mr. Moretti is a private man. He requires a wife for reasons related to certain business and family obligations, and he's prepared to offer a considerable arrangement in exchange." Emma had almost laughed, had almost stood up and walked out. The whole thing sounded like the plot of a bad movie. Rich stranger offers marriage contract to desperate woman. It was absurd, predatory, exactly the kind of thing she should have run from. But she was 3 weeks from homelessness. Her credit cards were maxed. Her mother in Ohio was already supporting Emma's younger sister through nursing school and couldn't help. And the manila envelope contained numbers that made her vision blur. $2 million, deposited in installments over 2 years, plus housing, plus health insurance, plus a security guarantee that Castellano described as comprehensive. In exchange, a legal marriage, separate residences, no physical requirements of any kind, minimal public appearances, and complete confidentiality. "Why me?" Emma had asked. Castellano had smiled, a careful, practiced smile that revealed nothing. "Mr. Moretti has his reasons." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm authorized to provide." She'd taken the envelope home, read it 17 times, called her sister, told her she'd met someone, lied about the details with the kind of fluency that frightened her. Then she'd called Castellano back and said yes. The courthouse ceremony was perfunctory. A judge who didn't make eye contact, Castellano as witness. Lucien in a dark suit, his expression unreadable, his handshake firm when they were introduced, and his voice even when he said, "I do," with all the emotional weight of a man confirming a lunch reservation. They'd signed the papers. He'd given her the platinum band. She'd given him a ring she'd bought at a pawn shop for $40. Plain gold, slightly scratched. He'd looked at it for a long moment, then slid it onto his finger without comment. Then he'd left. No reception, no photographs, no conversation about the future beyond what the documents already specified. That was 6 months ago. In the intervening time, the deposits had appeared in her account like clockwork. The health insurance materialized. A phone number was provided for emergencies. And Lucien Moretti became a name on a marriage certificate that she kept in a fireproof lockbox under her bed, as though hiding it might make the whole arrangement less real. Now she lay on her second-hand couch in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, wearing a dress she'd bought at a consignment shop specifically for tonight's gallery event, listening to the building's ancient pipes groan in the walls, and tried to reconcile what she knew with what she'd just experienced. He'd come for her. He'd known about her paintings. He'd known about the second deadbolt, and he'd asked her to move in. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lucian's face in the gallery. Not the mask of control he'd worn while dismantling Preston, but the moment before. The crack. That glimpse of something volcanic behind the ice. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and made coffee. sat at her kitchen counter with her laptop and typed his name into a search engine. The results were the same as they'd always been. Almost nothing. A few corporate registrations for holding companies. A single mention in a Financial Times article about European banking buried in the 14th paragraph, citing the Moretti family's historical influence in transatlantic finance. No photos. No interviews. No social media presence. Then she found the forums, buried in the deep corners of the internet, on sites she had to use a VPN to access. She found threads about the Moretti family that read like fiction. Old money connected to organized operations across 3 continents. Lucien's father, allegedly a figure of enormous underworld influence who died under circumstances that varied depending on who was telling the story. Car accident, poisoning, execution, suicide. Lucien taking control at 23, consolidating power, eliminating rivals, building something that operated in the space between legitimate business and something much darker. None of it was verified. None of it could be. That was the point. The Morettis existed in a space where rumor and reality were indistinguishable, and both were equally effective at keeping people afraid. Emma closed the laptop. Her coffee had gone cold. She was married to this man. She'd accepted his money, worn his ring, and walked back into that gallery tonight on his arm, in front of people who feared him enough to go silent at his entrance. Whatever distance she'd maintained over the past 6 months, the separate apartments, the minimal contact, the careful fiction that this was just a business arrangement, that distance had collapsed tonight. Preston Hale had forced the issue, but Lucien had finished it, and now she had a choice. Her phone sat dark and silent on the kitchen counter. No new messages, but she could still feel the weight of his last text. Lock the second deadbolt, sitting in her chest like a stone. He knew things about her that he shouldn't know. He cared about her safety in ways the arrangement didn't require. And he'd looked at her tonight with something behind his eyes that terrified her more than Preston ever had. Because Preston's cruelty was predictable. Lucien's intensity was not. At 4 a.m, Emma stood at her bedroom window, staring at the brick wall 3 feet away. Somewhere beyond it, Manhattan hummed with its restless electric pulse, and somewhere in that city, in a penthouse she'd visited once, a man she'd married for survival was awake. She was certain of it, thinking about her. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. The truth she couldn't speak out loud, the one that had been growing in the dark soil of her subconscious for weeks, finally surfaced. She wasn't afraid of Lucien Moretti because he was dangerous. She was afraid because when he'd walked into that gallery and placed his hand on her waist and spoken her name like it was the only word in any language that mattered, she'd felt safe. And Emma Vale hadn't felt safe in 3 years. That was the most dangerous thing of all. The next morning, Emma woke to a knock on her apartment door. Not loud, not aggressive. 3 measured raps, evenly spaced. The kind of knock that suggested the person on the other side had all the time in the world and knew exactly how long they were willing to wait. She pulled on a sweatshirt, pushed her tangled hair from her face, and looked through the peephole. Castellano. She opened the door halfway. "It's 7 a.m. Good morning, Mrs. Moretti." The lawyer stood in the hallway holding a leather briefcase and wearing a suit that probably cost more than every item in her apartment combined. "May I come in?" "You can tell me what you want from the hallway." "I have documents that require your attention. Mr. Moretti asked that I deliver them personally." "He couldn't send an email?" Castellano's expression didn't change. "Mr. Moretti prefers certain communications to remain offline." Emma stared at him for a long moment, then stepped aside. The lawyer entered her apartment with the careful movements of a man accustomed to spaces far larger and far cleaner. He didn't comment on the secondhand furniture, the bare walls, or the coffee mug sitting unwashed in the sink. He simply placed his briefcase on the kitchen counter, clicked it open, and withdrew a folder. "Following last night's events," Castellano said, "Mr. Moretti has made several adjustments to the terms of your arrangement." "I didn't agree to any adjustments. These are additions, not modifications. The original terms remain intact." He opened the folder. "First, a dedicated security operative has been assigned to your personal protection. This individual will maintain a discreet distance but will be present whenever you leave this apartment." "I don't want a bodyguard." "It's not a request." Castellano said it without malice, the way a man might inform you that gravity works downward. "Second, Mr. Moretti has arranged for the building's security systems to be upgraded. New cameras in the lobby and stairwells, reinforced entry points, improved lighting. The building's owner has already approved the changes. The building's owner approved renovations because a tenant's husband asked. The building's owner is responsive to Mr. Moretti's requests. Emma felt that cold sensation in her stomach again. Lucien owns this building, doesn't he? Castellano's silence was its own answer. He owns this building, Emma repeated, her voice flattening. He owns the building I live in. Did he own the building I lived in before? The one I got evicted from? Mrs. Moretti. Did he? The lawyer closed the folder, set his hands flat on the counter. For the first time since she'd known him, his composure flickered. That question, he said carefully, is one you should direct to Mr. Moretti personally. The cold in Emma's stomach turned to ice. She looked at Castellano, at his careful suit and careful face and careful hands, at the folder of documents that represented Lucien's latest attempt to draw the walls tighter around her life, at the apartment that she now realized might never have been hers, might have been, from the very beginning, just another room in a cage designed by a man who didn't ask for permission because he didn't believe he needed it. Get out, she said quietly. Castellano gathered his briefcase without argument. At the door, he paused. Mr. Moretti will be at the penthouse this evening. He's asked me to convey that you're welcome to visit. No obligations, no documents, just a conversation. Get out. He left. Emma locked the door, both deadbolts. Then she stood in the middle of her kitchen and pressed her fists against her temples and tried to breathe through the pressure building inside her skull. He'd engineered this. All of it. The eviction. The desperation. The offer that appeared exactly when she had no other options. Every step of the path that led her to Lucien Moretti had been paved by Lucien Moretti. And she'd walked it gratefully, never once questioning why a man who could have any woman in the world had chosen a broken graphic designer with smudged mascara and paintings she was too afraid to show anyone. She should be terrified. She should call a lawyer, a real one, not Castellano, someone who worked for her instead of him, and start the process of extracting herself from this arrangement before it swallowed her whole. She should run. Instead, she stood very still in her kitchen and felt the terrible contradictory truth settle over her like a second skin. Part of her was horrified, and part of her, the part she couldn't silence, the part that remembered the way Lucien's hand had felt on her waist, the weight and certainty of it, the way he'd spoken her name like a man reciting something sacred. That part of her wanted to walk into his penthouse tonight, look him in the eye, and demand to know every dark corner of the obsession that had brought her here. Because if Lucien Moretti had built a cage around her life, he'd also done something no one else had ever managed. He'd noticed she was alive. At 6 that evening, Emma Vale stood on the sidewalk outside the Moretti building in Tribeca, wearing jeans and a black sweater that still smelled faintly of menthol from the couch, staring up at 32 stories of glass and steel that looked less like a residence and more like a monument to the kind of power most people never encounter. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were steady. She walked through the lobby, marble floors, security desk manned by 2 men who recognized her on sight, and rode the private elevator to the penthouse in complete silence. The doors opened onto a foyer the size of her entire apartment, and beyond it, a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows revealing Manhattan at dusk, the skyline bleeding orange and purple and gold into the darkening sky. Lucien was standing at the windows with his back to her, no suit jacket, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a glass of something dark in his right hand. He didn't turn when she entered. Castellano told me about the building, Emma said, her voice carrying across the vast space. Both buildings, the one I was evicted from and the one I live in now. Silence. He also told me to direct my questions to you personally, so here I am. She took a breath. Did you buy my old building? Did you engineer the eviction? Did you create the situation that forced me to accept your proposal? Lucien set his glass on the windowsill, turned slowly. In the fading light, his face was half illuminated and half shadowed, and his eyes were completely unreadable. Yes, he said, one word, no apology. No justification, just the truth, delivered with the same flat certainty he applied to everything. Emma felt the floor shift beneath her. Not literally. The penthouse was solid, built to withstand anything. But internally, something foundational cracked. The last wall of denial she'd been maintaining, the one that had allowed her to believe this arrangement was just business, just survival, just two strangers exchanging convenience. That wall crumbled, and behind it was something she wasn't prepared for. "Why?" she whispered. Lucien crossed the room toward her, stopped 4 feet away, close enough that she could see the scar through his left eyebrow, the faint stubble along his jaw, the tension in his shoulders that belied the calm of his voice. "Because I saw you," he said. 8 months before Castellano approached you, at the Children's Hospital on East 68th, you were reading to a boy, 7, maybe 8 years old. He was dying. You knew he was dying. Everyone in the room knew. And you sat on the edge of his bed and you read him a story about a dragon who was afraid of his own fire. And when you got to the ending, you were crying, but you didn't stop reading. You didn't look away. You stayed with him until the last page. And when it was over, you smiled at him like nothing in the world was wrong." He paused. His jaw tightened. "I watched you walk out of that hospital room and sit in the hallway and press your hands over your face and shake. And then you stood up, wiped your eyes, and walked into the next room and did it again. For a different child. A different story. The same impossible kindness." Emma couldn't breathe. "I don't do things the way other people do them," Lucien said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to ask. I don't know how to wait. I saw something that day that I couldn't stop thinking about, and I did what I've always done. I found a way to make it mine." The penthouse was silent except for the hum of the city far below. "You manipulated me," Emma said. Her voice cracked on the second word. "Yes. You destroyed my life so you could rebuild it around yourself." "Yes. And you think that's acceptable?" He held her gaze. "No. I think it's what I did. And I think you deserve to know." Emma stood in the penthouse of the most dangerous man she'd ever met, surrounded by wealth she couldn't comprehend, wearing jeans that still smelled like someone else's cigarettes, and felt the world divide itself into 2 clean halves. In one half, she walked out, called a lawyer, filed for annulment, took whatever money she'd already received and disappeared into a life that was small and safe and entirely her own. In the other half, she stayed. Not because she forgave him, not because she understood him, but because for the first time in 3 years, someone had looked at her, really looked, and seen something worth destroying a world to possess. The city burned beneath the windows like an electric ocean, and Emma Vale, standing at the exact center of a choice that would define everything that came after, opened her mouth to speak, and the penthouse phone rang. Lucien's expression changed instantly. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by something cold and operational. He crossed to the phone in 3 strides, answered, listened for 6 seconds, and hung up. When he turned back to Emma, the man who'd just confessed his obsession was gone. In his place was someone harder, sharper, running calculations she couldn't follow behind eyes that had turned to black glass. "You need to stay here tonight," he said. "What? Why?" "Someone just tried to kill Castellano." The word hung in the air like gun smoke. Castellano. Emma's mind stuttered, trying to process. Castellano. The silver-haired lawyer who had sat in her kitchen 7 hours ago with his immaculate suit and his measured composure and his briefcase full of documents. The man who had brokered her marriage. The man who had walked out of her apartment this morning and disappeared into the city like he'd done 1,000 times before. Someone had tried to kill him. "Is he alive?" Emma asked. Lucien was already moving. He crossed the penthouse in long, precise strides, pulling his phone from his pocket, pressing it to his ear. He spoke in rapid Italian, clipped, commanding, a language she didn't understand but whose tone needed no translation. Orders. He was giving orders. "Lucien, is Castellano alive?" He covered the phone with his palm. "He's in surgery. That's all I know." He turned away, resumed the call. His voice dropped lower and she caught a single English phrase buried in the Italian. "Find out who." Emma stood in the middle of the penthouse foyer with her arms wrapped around herself and watched the man she'd married transform in real time. The vulnerability he'd shown minutes ago, the confession about the hospital, the rawness in his voice, had been sealed behind a wall of operational efficiency so fast it was like watching a door slam shut in a hurricane. Whatever Lucien Moretti felt about Castellano's condition, Whatever fear or fury was churning beneath the surface, none of it reached his face. He ended the call. Made another. Ended that one too. Then he stood at the window with his back to her, both hands braced against the glass, his head slightly bowed, his shoulders rigid beneath the white shirt. You said I need to stay here tonight, Emma said. Why? What does Castellano being attacked have to do with me? Maybe nothing. He didn't turn around. Maybe everything. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. Then give me a better one or I'm walking out that door. He turned. The look on his face stopped her cold. Not anger. Something past anger. Something that had burned through anger and come out the other side into a territory she didn't have a name for. Castellano was shot, Lucian said, each word landing like a hammer on cold metal. Twice. Once in the chest, once in the shoulder, outside his apartment in the West Village, 30 minutes ago. Who? I don't know yet. But Castellano is the man who manages my personal affairs. All of them, including our marriage. If someone wanted to send me a message, hurting the man who knows my secrets would be an effective way to do it. Emma felt the temperature in the room drop. Not literally. The penthouse was climate-controlled to the degree. But inside her body, something went cold. You think this is about you, she said. Everything in my world is about me. That's the problem. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her, close. Closer than he'd ever stood voluntarily. She could see the pulse in his neck, faster than his composed expression suggested. I can't protect you if you're in Brooklyn, he said. Your apartment has one deadbolt that works, a fire escape that anyone could climb, and a front door that a determined 12-year-old could kick in. The building security I ordered this morning hasn't been installed yet. If someone knows about Castellano, they might know about you. Might. I don't operate on might. I operate on worst case. Emma looked past him at the wall of windows. Manhattan glittered below. Indifferent. Enormous. A city that swallowed people whole without noticing. One night, she said. One night. And tomorrow we talk. About everything. The buildings, the eviction, Castellano, all of it. No lawyers, no intermediaries. Just you and me. Lucien's jaw tightened. Agreed. He led her to a guest suite on the far side of the penthouse, a room larger than her entire apartment, decorated in muted grays and whites, with a bed that looked like it had never been slept in. He placed a folded set of clothes on the dresser, a gray t-shirt, black sweatpants, both clearly his, both smelling faintly of that dark, woody cologne. Lock the door if you want, he said from the threshold. Security is posted in the hallway and the lobby. Nobody gets to this floor without my authorization. Where will you be? Downstairs, making calls. Are you going to sleep? Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, but close. No. He pulled the door shut. His footsteps receded down the hallway, measured, unhurried, the walk of a man heading into a long night of ugly work. Emma sat on the edge of the guest bed and pressed her hands together between her knees to stop them from shaking. She didn't sleep. Not really. She lay in the enormous bed in Lucian's borrowed clothes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building breathe around her. Distant sounds filtered through the walls. A phone ringing once. Footsteps. A muffled voice she thought might be Lucien's but couldn't be sure. At 3 a.m, she gave up pretending. Got out of bed. Padded barefoot down the hallway in Lucien's sweatpants, which she'd had to roll at the waist 3 times. She found him in the main living area, sitting on a leather sofa with his elbows on his knees and his phone on the coffee table and his head in his hands. The city lights from the windows threw long shadows across the floor, and in those shadows, he looked smaller than she'd ever seen him. Not physically. Lucien Moretti could never look physically small. But something about the curve of his spine, the way his fingers were threaded through his hair, the rawness of the posture, made him look like a man carrying something he wasn't sure he could hold. He heard her approach. She knew because his shoulders straightened a fraction of a second before she spoke. "Any news?" she asked. "He's out of surgery, stable. The chest wound missed his heart by 2 centimeters. Lucian lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot. Not from crying, from the sustained effort of not crying, which was somehow worse. 2 centimeters, Emma. That's the margin between my oldest friend being alive and being dead." She sat on the opposite end of the sofa, left space between them. The leather creaked softly. Castellano is more than your lawyer, she said. It wasn't a question. He was my father's lawyer first, then my father's friend, then mine. He's the only person alive who knew my mother. Lucien's voice cracked on the last word. He covered it by clearing his throat, but the damage was done. She'd heard it. Do you know who did it? I have theories, none I'm willing to share with you. Why not? Because knowing who threatens me means knowing who might threaten you. I'd rather you didn't carry that. You don't get to decide what I carry. He looked at her. Really looked. The bloodshot eyes, the stubble shadowing his jaw, the rigid set of his mouth. All of it softened just enough for her to see the man underneath. The one who'd confessed his obsession earlier tonight in the same room. The one who'd watched her read to dying children and decided she was worth ruining a life for. You're right, he said quietly. I don't. Silence settled between them. The city hummed below. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance, dopplering away into nothing. His name is Victor Corsetti, Lucien said. He runs operations in the port of Newark, shipping, logistics, the kind of logistics that involves containers nobody inspects. We had an arrangement, territorial, financial, mutually beneficial. 6 weeks ago, I ended it. Why? Because he started moving things I won't move. Children, Emma. Corsetti was trafficking minors through the port, and when I found out, I shut him down. Seized his assets, burned his supply chain, cost him roughly $40 million in a single week. Emma's stomach turned. And now he's retaliating. Castellano was a message, a warning shot. Corsetti doesn't have the infrastructure to come at me directly. Not yet. So he's picking off the periphery, testing how I respond. And how will you respond? Lucien's expression hardened into something she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not calculation, but something older and colder. The face of a man who'd grown up inside violence and learned its grammar before he learned anything else. Decisively, he said. The word landed like a blade on stone. Emma pulled her knees to her chest. The sweatpants were too big and bunched around her ankles. She looked absurd, barefoot, drowning in a dangerous man's clothes, sitting on a sofa that cost more than her annual income, discussing organized crime at 3 a.m. as though this were normal. None of this was normal. You asked me earlier why I came tonight, she said, to the penthouse. I remember. I came because I needed to understand what you are. Whether you're the man who confessed to manipulating my entire life, or the man who came to rescue me at a gallery, or the man who waited until I locked both deadbolts before driving away. I needed to know which one was real. They're all real. That's the problem. Lucien leaned back, stared at the ceiling. His throat moved as he swallowed. My father was not a good man, he said. He was brilliant, strategic. He built everything I currently control from nothing, from a single shipping company operating out of a warehouse in Red Hook. He turned it into an empire, and he did it by being willing to do things other people weren't. Terrible things, necessary things, things that kept his family alive and his enemies afraid. He paused. My mother was the opposite, quiet, kind. She painted, watercolors mostly, landscapes of places she'd never been. She hung them in every room of our house, and my father never took them down. Even after she died, he left them exactly where they were. Dusty frames, fading colors. He'd walk past them every morning and touch the corner of the one nearest the kitchen. Just a tap, like a habit he couldn't break. Emma watched his face. The muscles around his eyes were tight, holding something back. When I saw you at the hospital, Lucien said, reading to that boy, crying and smiling at the same time, I saw her, my mother, the same impossible combination of softness and strength, and something in me broke. The part that was supposed to keep people at a distance, the part my father spent years building, it just cracked. So you stalked me. He flinched, barely, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, the kind of micro-expression most people would miss. But Emma was watching closely now, mapping every fracture in his composure, and she caught it. I investigated you, he said. I learned everything I could, and then I created conditions that would bring you to me. Yes. He sat forward, braced his elbows on his knees again. I won't insult you by calling it something it wasn't. Good. Because it was manipulation. It was control. It was exactly the kind of thing Preston did to me, just with better resources. That one hit. She saw it land, saw his body absorb the comparison like a physical blow, his shoulders pulling back, his fingers curling into loose fists against his thighs. "Don't compare me to him," Lucian said. His voice was low and dangerous. "Why not? He controlled me with words. You controlled me with money and real estate. The method changes. The result is the same. I ended up exactly where someone else wanted me, with no say in how I got there. The result is not the same." Lucian stood, paced to the window. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass, a ghost version of himself, transparent, layered over the glittering city. "Preston diminished you. He made you smaller. Everything I did, twisted, manipulative, wrong, was designed to give you more. More space, more security, more freedom to become whoever you wanted to be." "Freedom?" Emma laughed, and the sound was sharp and humorless. "You engineered my eviction. You destroyed the one stable thing in my life so you could swoop in with a contract and a checkbook. That's not freedom, Lucian. That's a hostage negotiation where the hostage doesn't know she's been taken." He turned from the window. His face was stripped bare now. No mask, no calculation, just raw, exposed need, and the terrifying knowledge that the woman he'd schemed to possess might be right about everything. "Then leave," he said. The words dropped between them like a grenade. "The door isn't locked. Your money is in your account. The arrangement guarantees you can walk away at any point, for any reason, with everything you've already received. Castellano made sure of that. Even if I wanted to trap you, the legal structure wouldn't allow it." "You expect me to believe that? I expect you to read the documents. They're in the folder Castellano left on your counter this morning. Section 9, paragraph 4. Unilateral termination clause. You leave whenever you want. No penalties, no repayment, nothing." Emma stared at him. "You put a termination clause in a marriage contract designed to trap me?" "I put a termination clause in a marriage contract designed to keep you. There's a difference." "Explain the difference." "Keeping someone means making sure they stay by choice. Every day. Trapping someone means making sure they can't leave." "I never wanted you trapped. I wanted you to choose this. Choose me." His voice broke on the last word. He turned back to the window. "I just didn't know how to ask." The penthouse was silent. Even the city seemed to hold its breath. Emma stood, crossed the room, stopped 3 feet behind him, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched at his sides, the almost imperceptible tremor running through his frame. "Show me," she said. He turned his head. "Show you what?" "The scars. Castellano mentioned, obliquely months ago, that you carry damage from your father's world. I want to see it." Lucien was motionless for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached up and began unbuttoning his shirt. Not seductively, not performatively. With the mechanical precision of a man removing armor, each button a small surrender. The shirt fell open. Emma's breath caught. His torso was a map of violence. A thick, ropey scar curved across his left side, from hip to the lower edge of his ribcage. A knife wound, old enough to have faded to silver, but deep enough to have warped the muscle beneath. 2 circular scars on his right shoulder, puckered and smooth, the unmistakable signature of bullets. A lattice of thin white lines across his abdomen that could have been defensive wounds or something worse. And on his back, when he turned slightly, a burn scar the size of a spread hand, the skin there permanently altered. Shiny, tight, alien. "I was 14 the first time someone tried to kill me," he said. "A rival family. They came to our house in the middle of the night. My father wasn't home. My mother was dead by then. 3 years by then. It was just me and the house staff, and the house staff ran." He touched the knife scar absently, the way someone might touch a tattoo they'd forgotten they had. "I didn't run." "Lucien, the bullet wounds are from my 20s. The burn is from a warehouse fire that I'm 70% sure was set intentionally. The small ones..." He looked down at his own body with an expression that bordered on disgust. "The small ones I don't remember anymore. There were too many." Emma reached out. Her hand stopped an inch from his chest. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could see the rise and fall of his breathing, faster now than it had been. "Can I?" she whispered. He nodded once. She pressed her palm flat against the bullet scar on his right shoulder. The skin there was smooth and hard, like river stone. Beneath it, she felt his heartbeat, rapid, urgent, completely at odds with the controlled stillness of his face. He closed his eyes. Nobody touched Lucien Moretti. She understood that with sudden, absolute clarity. People feared him, obeyed him, depended on him. But nobody touched him. Not with gentleness, not without agenda, not like this. She moved her hand to the knife scar, traced its length with her fingertips, felt his stomach muscles contract involuntarily, felt the breath shudder through him, felt the massive, carefully constructed architecture of his self-control begin to tremble under the weight of something as simple as a woman's hand on his skin. Emma. Her name came out rough, broken. If you don't stop, I won't be able to… To what? To let you leave. If you touch me like this and then walk out tomorrow, I will spend the rest of my life trying to feel this again. And I will destroy everything in my path to get it. She pulled her hand back, not because she was afraid, because she believed him absolutely. They stood in the dark penthouse with Manhattan burning below them and the weight of everything unspoken pressing against the walls. I'm not leaving tomorrow, Emma said. Lucien opened his eyes. The look in them was something she would carry forever. Not hope, exactly, but the place where hope lives before it's been given permission to exist. But I'm not forgiving you either, she said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You took something from me, my autonomy, my choice, and I need you to understand that no amount of renovation or security or confessions in the dark is going to erase that. I understand. Do you? Because the man who bought my building and engineered my eviction didn't seem particularly concerned with my autonomy. That man was operating on instinct, on need. He saw something he wanted and took the most direct path to it. He was wrong. And the man standing in front of me now, Lucien held her gaze. The man standing in front of you now is terrified, because for the first time in his life, the thing he wants most is something he can't take. He can only receive it, and he has no idea how to do that. Emma felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, crack. The way ice cracks on a river in early spring. The structure still holds, but the fracture is there, and eventually the water will find its way through. Her phone rang. She'd left it on the coffee table. They both looked at it. The screen glowed in the dark room. An unknown number. Lucien's expression changed. The vulnerability vanished. The operational mask snapped back into place. Don't answer that, he said. It might be… Don't. The phone stopped ringing. 5 seconds later, a text appeared from the same unknown number. Emma crossed the room and looked at the screen. The message was 4 words. Ask him about Elena. The blood drained from Emma's face. She held the phone up so Lucien could see the screen. His reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Every remaining trace of warmth, of openness, of the man who'd just confessed his terror at being vulnerable, all of it died. What replaced it was something Emma had never seen before. Not anger, not fear. Something beyond both. A stillness so complete and so absolute that it felt like standing next to a bomb in the half-second before detonation. Who is Elena? Emma asked. Lucien didn't answer. He took the phone from her hand, stared at the message, and then did something that frightened her more than anything that had happened in the past 12 hours. He sat down, not on the sofa, on the floor. Right there, in the middle of the penthouse, a man who controlled an empire worth billions, who made politicians nervous and criminals disappear. He sat on the floor with his back against the base of the sofa and his hands hanging between his knees and his head bowed forward, and he went absolutely still. Lucien. Emma knelt beside him. Who is Elena? When he finally spoke, his voice was a sound she'd never heard from him before. Hollow, scraped clean, the voice of a man who'd just been gutted by 4 words on a screen. My daughter, he said. My daughter. The words hit the floor of the penthouse like a body dropping from a great height. Emma knelt beside Lucien, her knees pressing into the cold hardwood, her hands frozen in her lap, her mind scrambling to rearrange everything she thought she knew about the man she'd married into a shape that included a child. A daughter. He had a daughter. How old? Emma's voice came out thin. Barely there. Lucien didn't lift his head. His hands hung between his knees, fingers loose, palms up. The posture of a man who had stopped holding things together and was letting the pieces fall where they wanted. 4. She turned 4 in September. Where is she? Safe. That's not what I asked. It's what I can give you right now. Emma sat back on her heels. The penthouse hummed with the distant vibration of a building designed to keep the world out, and the silence between them was so total she could hear his breathing, shallow, controlled, the breathing of a man managing something enormous behind his ribs. You have a 4-year-old daughter, Emma said, and each word landed separately, like stones dropped into still water. We've been married for 6 months. Castellano drew up contracts, prenuptial agreements, disclosure documents. I signed 43 pages. 43. And not one of them mentioned a child. Lucien lifted his head. His eyes were dry but devastated. Not red, not swollen, just emptied. Gutted from the inside. The eyes of a man who had just watched his most protected secret get ripped open by 4 words on a stranger's phone. Her name is Elena Moretti, he said. Her mother was a woman named Sarah Voss. Sarah died 14 months ago, complications from an illness she kept hidden until it was too late. And the child? Lives with a family I trust, outside the city, under a name that isn't connected to mine. You hid her. I protected her. From what? From this. He gestured vaguely at the penthouse, the windows, the city glittering below like a circuit board. From my name. From every person who would use a 4-year-old girl as leverage against her father. From men like Corsetti, who shot Castellano tonight because I shut down his trafficking operation. You think he wouldn't use a child? My child? His voice cracked on the last 2 words. Not dramatically, not performatively. A hairline fracture, the kind you barely see before the whole structure gives way. Emma stood up, walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the glass the way she'd pressed it against her apartment window hours ago, a lifetime ago, in a version of reality where the man she'd married was merely obsessive and manipulative rather than obsessive and manipulative, and a father who had hidden the existence of his own child. Who sent that text? She asked. I don't know yet. Guess. Lucien was quiet for a moment. Then, Corsetti, or someone working for him. Castellano knew about Elena. If Castellano was compromised before the shooting, if someone accessed his files, his phone, anything, they could have found her. Could have found her, meaning they might know where she is. Yes. Right now. Tonight. Yes. Emma turned from the window, looked at him still sitting on the floor, this man who controlled an empire, who terrified billionaires, who had orchestrated her entire life to bring her within arm's reach, reduced to a figure on the ground, shoulders bowed, hands empty, undone by the possibility that his daughter was in danger. Call them, she said. What? The family. The people watching Elena. Call them right now and make sure she's safe. Something shifted in Lucien's expression. Surprise, maybe? Or the recognition that the woman he'd manipulated into marriage was now giving him orders, and he was going to follow them. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed, listened. His jaw worked silently as the line rang once, twice, 3 times. Someone answered. Lucien spoke in low, rapid Italian. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Emma watched his face for cues and saw the tension release from his shoulders by increments. Not all of it, not even most of it, but enough. He ended the call. She's fine, sleeping. Security has been doubled. Good. Emma crossed her arms. Now tell me everything. And I mean everything, Lucien, because I have stood in this penthouse tonight and absorbed more lies and revelations than most people process in a year. And I am exactly one more surprise away from walking out that door and never coming back. He looked up at her from the floor. The power dynamic had inverted completely. She was standing, he was sitting, and for once the geometry matched the truth. She held the power here. Not financial power, not physical power, but something more fundamental. The power of a woman who could leave and take with her the only softness his brutal life had ever contained. Sarah and I were never together, Lucien began. He spoke slowly, choosing each word with the care of a man diffusing a device. Not in any real sense. She was an associate, smart, ambitious, connected to certain European financial networks I needed access to. We had an arrangement, brief, transactional. When she told me she was pregnant, I offered to support her fully. She refused. She wanted independence. She wanted Elena raised outside my world. And you agreed? I fought it for months. I wanted Elena with me, in my home, carrying my name. Sarah wouldn't allow it. She said, and she was right, that a child associated with the Moretti name would never have a normal life, would never be safe. So we compromised. Elena would be raised by Sarah with my financial support under Sarah's family name. I would have access, not custody, access. How often did you see her? Every 2 weeks, sometimes more. I'd drive to their apartment in Connecticut, spend a few hours, read to her, watch her draw, leave before she was old enough to understand why the man who visited never stayed. His voice caught again. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye. When Sarah got sick, she didn't tell me. Not until the end. I found out from a mutual associate that she'd been in treatment for months. By the time I got to the hospital, she had maybe a week left. She asked me to promise 2 things. First, that Elena would stay hidden. No Moretti name. No connection to my world. Second, he stopped. His jaw clenched so hard Emma could see the muscle jump beneath the skin. Second, that I would find someone good. Someone who could be in Elena's life, not a nanny, not staff. A person who understood what it meant to love a child without conditions. Emma felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. You're saying Sarah asked you to find someone, Emma said, her voice barely controlled, and then you found me. The timeline isn't that clean. Don't manage me, Lucian. Did Sarah's dying wish play a role in you seeking me out? He met her eyes. I saw you at the hospital 3 weeks after Sarah died. I was there visiting Elena's doctor, Sarah's old pediatrician. You were in the children's ward, reading to that boy, and everything I told you earlier tonight was true. I watched you. I became obsessed. But underneath the obsession, yes. Sarah's words were in my head, find someone good. And there you were, and there. Emma's hands were shaking. She balled them into fists at her sides and felt her nails bite into her palms, and was grateful for the small, sharp pain, because it kept her anchored in a moment that was threatening to pull her under. So let me understand this, she said, and her voice was ice now, every syllable precise and frozen. You watched your daughter's mother die. She asked you to find someone for Elena. You saw me at a hospital, decided I was the one, bought my building, engineered my eviction, hired your lawyer to approach me with a marriage contract, and at no point during any of this, the courtship, the proposal, the wedding, the 6 months of marriage, did you mention that I was being auditioned for the role of mother to a child I didn't know existed? Lucian said nothing. Answer me. Everything you just said is accurate. Emma laughed. It came out ugly, a raw, scraped sound that echoed off the penthouse walls and came back to her sounding like someone else entirely. I want to hit you, she said. I have never wanted to hit another person in my life. And right now I want to hit you so hard your ancestors feel it. I wouldn't stop you. Don't do that. Don't be noble. Don't sit there on the floor looking broken and tragic and offer to let me hurt you like that somehow makes this okay. You lied to me. Not once. Continuously. Every day of our marriage has been a lie. Every deposit in my bank account was payment for a job I didn't know I was applying for. She was pacing now, moving back and forth in front of the windows, her bare feet slapping against the hardwood, Lucian's oversized sweatpants dragging on the floor. She looked ridiculous. She felt murderous. You had no right, she said. You had no right to make that choice for me. If you had come to me, honestly, openly, like a human being instead of a chess player, and told me about Elena, told me what happened with Sarah, told me you were looking for someone to be part of your daughter's life, I might have said yes. Do you understand that? I might have actually chosen this. But you took that away from me. You took the choice away because you were so terrified of hearing no that you built an entire architecture of manipulation to guarantee yes. Lucian stood up. The motion was slow, effortful, as though his body had grown heavier in the last few minutes. He stood in front of her and he looked old. Not physically, not in years, but in the way a man looks when the weight of his own decisions finally becomes visible on his face. You're right, he said, about all of it. I know I'm right. And I know that knowing I'm wrong doesn't fix anything. I can't undo the buildings. I can't undo the eviction. I can't retroactively insert honesty into a process that was built on its absence. All I can do is tell you the truth now and accept whatever you do with it. The truth now. After Castellano gets shot, after someone sends me a text about a daughter you never mentioned, that's when truth becomes convenient for you? It's not convenient, it's necessary. Those aren't the same thing. In my world, they are. Stop saying that. Emma stepped closer, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the stubble shadowing his jaw, the scar through his eyebrow that she now noticed was slightly raised, the tissue still angry after what must have been years. Stop using your world as an excuse. Your world isn't some separate reality with different rules. You chose it. Every day you wake up and choose to be this person, the schemes, the control, the secrets. That's not a world. That's a series of decisions, and you made every single one of them. He flinched, the first real visible flinch she'd ever gotten from him. It moved through his face like a tremor, there and gone in half a second, but unmistakable. His phone rang. He didn't move, just stood there, looking at Emma, while the phone vibrated in his hand with a fury that seemed to match the room. "Answer it," she said. He answered, listened. His face changed, not gradually, instantaneously, the way a screen changes when you flip a switch. Every trace of emotion, of vulnerability, of the man who'd just been flayed open by the truth, all of it vanished, replaced by something operational, something lethal. "When?" he said into the phone. Then, "How many?" Then, "How close?" He ended the call, looked at Emma with eyes that had gone completely flat. Corsetti's people found the house in Connecticut. The family moved Elena 20 minutes ago. She's safe. She's being relocated to a secondary location, but they breached the perimeter. They were inside the property. The words registered in Emma's body before her mind could process them. A cold wave that started in her stomach and radiated outward until even her fingertips felt numb. "They were inside the house," she repeated. "The house where your daughter sleeps." She wasn't there. She'd already been moved. "By 20 minutes?" "Yes. 20 minutes, Lucien. Your 4-year-old daughter was 20 minutes from being taken by the people who shot your lawyer." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The reality of it was written on his face in a language more honest than anything he'd said all night. Pure, uncut terror. The kind that doesn't scream or rage or pace. The kind that goes perfectly, lethally still. Emma watched him stand in the center of his penthouse. This man who controlled an empire, who manipulated lives like chess pieces, who had engineered her existence into his orbit with the precision of a military campaign. And she saw him for what he actually was, beneath every layer of power and control and carefully maintained myth. A father. A terrified father whose daughter had just come within 20 minutes of being used as a weapon against him. And in that moment, standing barefoot in his borrowed clothes in the middle of the night, something inside Emma shifted. Not forgiveness. She was light years from forgiveness. Not understanding. She still didn't understand, might never understand, the wiring of a mind that expressed love through manipulation and protection through control. But something deeper. Something that bypassed logic entirely and operated on the same instinct that made her sit on the edge of dying children's beds and read stories until the last page. "Bring her here," Emma said. Lucien looked at her. "Your daughter, Elena. Bring her here, to the penthouse, tonight." "Emma, I don't know what I'm agreeing to. I don't know what this makes me. I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow or next week or next month. But right now, tonight, there is a 4-year-old girl being shuttled between safe houses because her father's enemies want to use her as leverage. And I am telling you to bring her somewhere she can sleep in an actual bed with actual walls around her and someone standing between her and the door." Lucien stared at her. The flat operational mask cracked, just for a second, just enough. And beneath it she saw something she had never expected to see on the face of the most dangerous man she'd ever known. Gratitude so vast it looked like grief. He dialed the phone, gave the order. And 2 hours later, at 5:17 in the morning, with the Manhattan sky turning from black to the deep bruised purple that precedes dawn, the penthouse elevator doors opened and a security operative stepped out carrying a sleeping girl in his arms. She was small, impossibly small. Dark curly hair pressed against the operative's shoulder, one tiny hand clutching a stuffed rabbit with a missing ear. Her face was flushed with sleep, her eyelids fluttering but not opening, her small body limp with the total, unconditional trust that only children can give. Lucien took her from the operative's arms with a gentleness that looked physically painful, as though he were handling something so fragile that even his breathing might break it. He cradled her against his chest, one massive hand supporting her head, and for a moment he just stood there in the foyer, holding his daughter, his face buried in her hair, his shoulders shaking with a tremor so fine that Emma might have missed it if she hadn't been watching for it. Elena stirred, made a small sound, not quite a word, not quite a cry, something between dreaming and waking. Her tiny fingers tightened on the rabbit's remaining ear. Lucien carried her to the guest room, laid her on the bed Emma had been unable to sleep in, pulled the covers over her small body with movements so careful and so precise they looked rehearsed, as though he'd practiced this moment in his mind 1,000 times, but never believed it would actually happen. He stood at the bedside looking down at his sleeping daughter, and the man Emma saw in that moment bore no resemblance to the one who had bought buildings and engineered evictions and orchestrated lives. This man was stripped to his foundation, raw architecture, a father standing watch. Emma leaned against the doorframe and felt the full, devastating weight of her situation settle onto her shoulders like a yoke. She was furious. She was heartsick. She was standing in the home of a man who had lied about everything, watching him love the one thing he hadn't lied about. And she understood with perfect, terrible clarity that she could not leave. Not because she was trapped, not because the contract held her, but because somewhere between the confession and the phone call, and the 20-minute margin, and the sleeping girl with the one-eared rabbit, Emma Vale had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She was in it now, all the way in. And outside the penthouse windows, the Manhattan skyline caught the first razor-thin line of sunrise, and Emma's phone, still sitting on the coffee table where she'd left it, lit up with a second message from the same unknown number. She didn't see it yet. But Lucien's security operative did, and when he read it, the color drained from his face. The message read, "She looks just like her mother. We'll be in touch." The security operative's name was Dante. He was 6'4", 240 pounds, ex-military, had worked Lucien's personal detail for 7 years, and Emma had never seen him show a single emotion beyond professional vigilance. He was showing one now. He stood in the hallway outside the guest room where Elena slept, holding Emma's phone like it might detonate, his face the color of concrete. When Lucien stepped out of the bedroom and pulled the door gently shut behind him, Dante extended the phone without a word. Lucien read the message. "She looks just like her mother. We'll be in touch." Nothing happened for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of absolute stillness in which Lucien Moretti's face became something Emma had never witnessed. Not the controlled mask, not the vulnerable man, not the operational commander. Something beneath all of those. Something foundational and terrible, like watching bedrock crack. Then he handed the phone back to Dante and said, in a voice so calm it made Emma's skin crawl, "Wake everyone up." The next 40 minutes were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Emma stood against the far wall of the penthouse living area and watched Lucien's world mobilize with the efficiency of a military operation, because that's exactly what it was. Men appeared, from the lobby, from vehicles parked on the street, from apartments in the same building that she now understood served as satellite posts for his security infrastructure. They filled the penthouse with low voices, urgent movements, the muted glow of laptop screens and phone calls conducted in 3 languages. Lucien stood at the center of it like a conductor. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pace, didn't gesticulate. He spoke in short, precise sentences, and people moved. That was the thing about real power. It didn't need volume. It barely needed words. Emma caught fragments, names she didn't recognize, locations, references to surveillance footage from the Connecticut house. Something about the port of Newark, something about a shipping container that had been intercepted 2 days ago. Then Lucien turned to her. "I need you to stay with Elena," he said. "In the guest room. Don't open the door for anyone except Dante." "Where are you going?" "To finish this." "Finish it how?" He didn't answer. Just looked at her with those flat black eyes that had become, over the course of one impossible night, the most complex landscape she'd ever tried to read. "Lucien!" She stepped forward, lowered her voice. "Finish it how?" "The way I finish everything, completely." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you want, trust me." "Trust you? After tonight? After the buildings, the eviction, the hidden daughter, the—" "Emma, He said her name the way a man says the word that's keeping him tethered to something, like a rope pulled taut. I have made mistakes that I will spend the rest of my life answering for, but right now, there's a man out there who knows my daughter's face, who has her photograph, who sent a message to your phone because he wanted me to know that the two people I would die for are both within his reach. And I am going to make sure that man never reaches for anything again. The two people I would die for. Emma heard it, registered it, filed it away in the part of her brain that was still functioning beyond the adrenaline and exhaustion and fear. He'd included her. Go, she said. He turned, walked 3 steps, stopped, came back. And before she could react, he cupped her face in both hands, his palms rough, his fingers trembling almost imperceptibly, and pressed his forehead against hers, just for a moment, just long enough for her to feel his breath on her lips and his heartbeat in his fingertips, and the entire terrifying weight of what he was about to do pressing against the thin membrane between them. Keep her safe, he whispered. Then he was gone. The penthouse emptied in minutes. The laptops were closed, the phones pocketed, the men who had filled the living area dispersed like smoke. Only Dante remained, positioned in the hallway outside the guest room, solid and immovable as a wall. Emma went into the guest room and closed the door. Elena was still sleeping. The one-eared rabbit had migrated during the night and now lay pressed against the girl's cheek, its remaining ear bent at an angle that would have been comical under any other circumstances. Elena's dark curls were spread across the white pillow, and her breathing was deep and steady and completely untroubled by the fact that her father had just gone to war on her behalf. Emma sat in the chair beside the bed, pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them, and waited. She waited through the sunrise, which turned the guest room windows from purple to gold. She waited through the sounds of the building waking up far below. Distant traffic, the muffled clang of the service elevator, the ordinary noises of a city that didn't know or care what was happening 32 stories above it. At 7:14, Elena opened her eyes. She didn't cry, didn't startle, just blinked, slowly, deliberately, the way children do when they're processing an unfamiliar environment, and then turned her head and looked directly at Emma. "Hi," Elena said. The voice was tiny, clear, completely unself-conscious. "Hi," Emma said back. Her own voice came out scratchy, wrecked from hours of silence and tension and unshed tears. "Where's my papa?" The question hit Emma in the chest like a fist. Papa. Not father, not daddy, not the formal distant title she might have expected from a child raised in hiding. Papa. The word was warm and worn, shaped by repetition, the word of a child who loved the man it belonged to. "He had to go somewhere," Emma said, "but he asked me to stay with you." Elena considered this. Her dark eyes, Lucien's eyes, unmistakably that same unsettling depth, studied Emma with an intensity that was startling in a 4-year-old. "Are you the lady?" Elena asked. "The lady?" "Papa said there was a lady. He said she was kind. He said she reads stories." Emma's throat closed. She pressed her hand against her mouth and breathed through her fingers until the pressure behind her eyes subsided enough for her to speak. "Yeah," she managed. "I'm the lady. Will you read me a story?" "I don't have a book." Elena pointed at the nightstand. On it, beneath a lamp Emma hadn't noticed before, sat a slim children's book with a worn cover, a painted dragon, orange and gold, curled protectively around a small flame. The title was barely legible from years of handling. "That's my book," Elena said. "Papa always reads it." Emma picked it up. The spine was cracked in 3 places. Several pages were dog-eared. A crayon mark, green, enthusiastic, clearly Elena's, decorated the inside cover. She opened to the first page and began to read. She was halfway through when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize, different from the one last night. It read, "Turn on the news." Emma's stomach dropped. She set the book down gently, told Elena she'd be right back, and stepped into the hallway. Dante was already looking at his own phone, his expression tight. "What's happening?" Emma asked. "The port," Dante said. "Newark." Emma found the remote for the living room television and turned it on. Every major news channel was running the same footage, aerial shots of the port of Newark, where a massive fire was consuming an entire section of the shipping terminal. Black smoke billowed into the morning sky in columns thick enough to cast shadows across the Hudson. Fire trucks and emergency vehicles swarmed the perimeter. A news anchor was talking about a possible industrial accident, a chemical fire, an ongoing investigation. Emma knew it wasn't an accident. She knew because the section of the port that was burning was the section Lucian had described last night. Corsetti's territory. His shipping lanes. His containers that nobody inspected. Lucian was burning it down. Not metaphorically. Not financially. He was physically, literally burning Victor Corsetti's empire to the ground, and he was doing it in broad daylight while the entire city watched. Her phone rang. Lucien's number. "Are you watching?" His voice was steady, controlled. Underneath it, she could hear wind, engines, men shouting in the background. "I'm watching. Lucien, the whole port is Corsetti's section. Only his. The adjacent terminals are fine. My people controlled the perimeter. This is your idea of finishing things completely? This is the opening move. Corsetti's financial infrastructure is gone. His shipping assets are gone. His insurance won't cover operations that were never declared to begin with. He's bleeding money right now at a rate that makes my takedown 6 weeks ago look like a parking ticket." And Corsetti himself? Silence. Then, "That's the next conversation." Lucian. "Is Elena awake?" The shift was so abrupt it almost gave her whiplash. From arson and criminal empire destruction to a father asking about his daughter's mourning with the same tone he might use to ask about the weather. "She's awake. She asked me to read to her." Another silence. Longer this time. She could hear him breathing on the other end. Not the controlled, measured breathing of the operational commander, but something rougher, something that caught in his throat. "The Dragon Book?" he asked. "The Dragon Book." He didn't say anything for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, lower, thicker, weighted with something that sounded like it was tearing loose from the inside. "Read it to the end. She likes the part where the dragon learns his fire doesn't have to hurt. She makes you read that page twice." He hung up. Emma stood in the penthouse living room with the television showing a port on fire and a dead phone in her hand and a 4-year-old girl waiting for her in the next room. And she felt the full crushing absurdity of her life settle onto her like a physical weight. She went back to Elena, read the Dragon Book to the end. Read the fire page twice, as promised. Elena smiled, a small, serious smile that was so much like her father's rare moments of genuine warmth that it made Emma's chest ache. 3 hours passed. Elena ate cereal that Dante produced from somewhere in the penthouse kitchen. She drew pictures with crayons on printer paper. The rabbit, the dragon, a tall, dark figure that she identified as Papa. She asked Emma 7 questions about her hair, 4 questions about her shoes, and 1 question that landed like a precision strike. "Are you going to stay?" Emma looked at the small girl sitting cross-legged on the penthouse floor with crayon-stained fingers and dark curls falling in her face, and her father's impossible eyes staring up with the kind of direct, uncomplicated honesty that only children and saints possess. "I don't know yet," Emma said, because lying to a child was the one thing she wouldn't do. Not tonight, not after everything, not... Elena nodded, went back to drawing. Drew a second figure next to the tall, dark one. Smaller, with brown hair and no shoes. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the elevator doors opened and Lucien walked in. He looked destroyed. Not injured, at least not visibly, but destroyed in the way a man looks after he's spent 8 hours doing things that cost pieces of himself he won't get back. His shirt was untucked, streaked with something dark that might have been smoke or dirt or something worse. His hair was disheveled. His hands, when he reached up to loosen his collar, were scraped raw across the knuckles. Elena looked up from her drawing. Her face split into a grin so wide and so pure it seemed to reorganize the light in the room. "Papa!" She ran to him. He dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor and caught her, scooped her up with those raw, damaged hands and held her against his chest and buried his face in her hair and stayed there, on his knees, holding his daughter, for a long time. His shoulders shook, his arms tightened, his breathing was audible, ragged, broken, the breathing of a man who has been holding himself together for hours by sheer will and is finally, in the presence of the one person who makes willpower unnecessary, letting go. Elena patted his back with one small hand. "Papa, you smell like smoke." A sound escaped him that was half laugh, half something else entirely. He pulled back, looked at his daughter's face, brushed a curl away from her forehead with a finger that trembled. I know, Piccola. I'm sorry. Did you fight a dragon? He glanced at Emma. Something moved through his eyes. Pain, gratitude, exhaustion, and beneath it all a current of something so raw and so unguarded that she had to look away. Something like that, he said. He carried Elena to the kitchen, made her a sandwich with the careful practiced movements of a man who had done this before, many times, in a different house, in a different life. Cut the crusts off, cut the sandwich diagonally, placed it on a plate with apple slices arranged in a fan. The domesticity of it, the tenderness, the muscle memory, was so jarring against the backdrop of what he'd spent the morning doing that Emma felt a vertigo that had nothing to do with the height of the building. While Elena ate, Lucien crossed the room to where Emma stood near the windows. He stopped 3 feet away, hands at his sides, scraped knuckles visible, smoke still clinging to his clothes. Corsetti is gone, he said quietly. Gone how? His operation is destroyed. His assets are frozen. His key people have been arrested. I fed evidence to a federal task force I've been supplying information to for 2 years. He's facing charges that will put him away for the rest of his life. And Corsetti himself? In custody. Federal marshals picked him up at a motel in Jersey City 3 hours ago. He was trying to run. You turned him over to the feds? I thought men like you handled things differently. Men like me handle things in whatever way produces the most permanent result. Prison is permanent. And in prison, Corsetti will be surrounded by people whose operations he damaged over the years, people who have long memories and no supervision. He paused. He'll never touch Elena. He'll never touch you. He'll never touch anyone again. Emma studied his face. The exhaustion carved into every line, the smoke in his hair, the scrapes on his hands that told a story he would probably never share completely. What did it cost you? She asked. What do you mean? This, today. Burning the port, turning evidence over to the feds, destroying Corsetti. What did it cost you personally? Because I've been around you long enough to understand that your world operates on debts and leverage, and an operation this big doesn't happen without sacrifice. Lucien looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, opened it, showed her the screen. It was a news article, a financial report. The headline referenced the Moretti Group, the legitimate face of Lucien's empire, and a massive, unexplained liquidation of assets. The numbers were staggering, hundreds of millions in holdings, dissolved overnight. I burned my own infrastructure to burn his, Lucien said. The port operations were entangled. My shipping routes ran through the same terminals. Destroying Corsetti meant destroying a significant portion of my legitimate business. How much? Enough that certain associates are already calling it reckless. Enough that my position, the leverage I've spent a decade building, is significantly weakened. You destroyed your own empire. I destroyed the part of it that stood between my daughter and a man who would have used her as a weapon. He put the phone away. I'd do it again, tonight, without hesitation. From the kitchen, Elena called out, Papa, can the lady read the dragon book again? Lucien closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. Her name is Emma, he called back, his voice perfectly steady despite the moisture tracking down one cheek. And yes, she can read it again. He looked at Emma, one tear on his left cheek cutting through the faint residue of smoke. He didn't wipe it. Will you? He asked. Not commanding, not requesting. Asking, genuinely asking, with the raw uncertainty of a man who had just sacrificed a kingdom and didn't know if the one thing he wanted in return would be given. Emma looked at him. Looked at Elena in the kitchen, swinging her legs from a chair too tall for her, crayon-stained fingers holding an apple slice. Then she looked back at Lucien and felt the last wall inside her, the one she'd built after Preston, reinforced after the eviction, fortified after every revelation of the past 24 hours, develop a crack so deep and so irreversible that she knew, with the bone-level certainty of someone stepping off a cliff, that there was no rebuilding it. Yeah, she said, I'll read it again. She walked toward the kitchen. Lucien caught her hand as she passed. Just for a second. just long enough for his scraped fingers to close around hers and squeeze, once, hard, desperate, before letting go. And in that grip, in those raw knuckles, and that single desperate squeeze, Emma felt the entire weight of what Lucien Moretti was offering her. Not a contract, not an arrangement, a family. Broken, dangerous, held together by violence and tenderness in equal measure. But a family. She sat down next to Elena, opened the dragon book, and as she began to read, her phone, still in the living room, still sitting on the coffee table, lit up one final time. This message wasn't from Corsetti's people. It was from Preston Hale, and it read, "I know what Moretti did to my business. I know about the federal investigation. I know he fed them my files, and I'm going to make sure the whole world knows what he really is, starting with you." Emma didn't see Preston's message until Elena fell asleep. The girl had lasted through 2 readings of the Dragon Book, a glass of warm milk that Lucien heated himself on the stove with the focused precision of a man performing surgery, and a slow, drowsy conversation about whether dragons could swim. Elena's position was that they could, but only if they held their breath. She delivered this verdict with absolute authority, then curled against the pillow with her one-eared rabbit pressed to her chest, and slipped into sleep between one breath and the next, the way children do, completely, without negotiation. As though consciousness were a coat they simply shrugged off. Lucien stood at the foot of the guest bed for a long time after Elena's breathing steadied. Emma watched him from the doorway. He didn't move, didn't touch the girl, just stood there absorbing the sight of his daughter sleeping safely in his home for the first time, and the expression on his face was one Emma knew she would never be able to describe accurately to another human being. A mixture of wonder and devastation and fierce, territorial love that looked almost indistinguishable from pain. Then she went to the living room and picked up her phone. Preston's message glowed on the screen like a lit fuse. "I know what Moretti did to my business. I know about the federal investigation. I know he fed them my files, and I'm going to make sure the whole world knows what he really is, starting with you." Emma read it 3 times, the first time with a jolt of adrenaline that spiked her pulse, the second time with something colder, a clarity that settled over her like ice water, numbing the panic, sharpening the edges. The third time with something that surprised her. Exhaustion. Not fear, not anger. Just a bone-deep cellular tiredness with being threatened by men who believed their rage entitled them to control over her life. Preston had done it with words and condescension. Corsetti had done it with bullets and surveillance. And now Preston was back, circling like a vulture who'd spotted something he mistook for carrion, not understanding that the woman he'd broken 3 years ago no longer existed. She showed the message to Lucien. He read it once. His jaw tightened. The muscle beneath his left eye twitched, a micro-expression she'd learned to read as the precursor to something dangerous. "He's desperate," Lucien said. "The federal investigation destroyed him. His assets are frozen. His social circle has abandoned him. He's facing criminal charges that carry a minimum of 12 years. This is a drowning man grabbing at anything that floats. He's threatening to expose you. He can try. Everything he might reveal is either already known to the people who matter or impossible to prove. My legal structure was built to withstand exactly this kind of attack." "And what about me?" He said, "starting with you." "What does that mean?" Lucien set the phone down on the coffee table, looked at her with an expression that was equal parts lethal focus and something softer. Concern, maybe, or the particular variety of anger that attaches to someone you care about being targeted. "It means he intends to hurt you publicly. Interviews, social media, whatever platform will have him. He'll paint you as complicit in my world, try to destroy your reputation the way his has been destroyed." "Can he?" "He can make noise. Noise fades. Easy to say when the noise isn't about you." Lucien accepted that, didn't argue, didn't deflect, just nodded once, the nod of a man who recognized the difference between his experience of consequences and hers. "What do you want to do?" he asked. The question stopped her, not because it was unexpected, but because it was genuine. After everything, the manipulation, the engineered eviction, the hidden daughter, the unilateral decisions that had shaped her life without her consent, Lucien Moretti was standing in his penthouse at 4 in the afternoon, smoke still faintly clinging to his clothes, scraped knuckles wrapped around nothing, asking her what she wanted. I want to handle it myself, Emma said. He blinked, the only sign of surprise he allowed himself. How? I'm going to meet him. Absolutely not. I didn't ask for permission. Emma, this man humiliated you in public less than 48 hours ago. He's now threatening to weaponize my reputation against you. Meeting him gives him exactly what he wants. Access. No. Meeting him on my terms takes away what he wants. He wants me scared. He wants me hiding behind you. He wants the version of Emma Vale he remembers. The one who stood in galleries holding warm champagne and couldn't speak when spoken to. That version is gone, Lucian. She's been gone since I walked into this penthouse and survived everything you threw at me. If I can survive you, Preston Hale is a paper cut. Something moved through Lucian's face. Complex, layered, resistant to easy interpretation. Pride, maybe. Fear, certainly. And underneath both, the slow, painful recognition that the woman he'd manipulated into his life had become someone far stronger than the person he'd originally targeted. Dante goes with you, he said, non-negotiable. Dante can wait in the car. Dante goes inside whatever building you're in, within visual range. Non-negotiable. Emma considered arguing. Decided against it. Some battles weren't worth the energy, and having 240 pounds of ex-military standing discreetly in the background while she confronted her ex-fiancé wasn't the worst compromise she'd ever made. Fine, she said. She texted Preston back from Lucien's penthouse, standing at the windows with Manhattan spread below her like a kingdom she'd never asked for and was only beginning to understand she might actually want. Her message was 3 sentences. Name a place. I'll be there tomorrow at noon. Come alone or don't come at all. Preston responded in 90 seconds. A restaurant in Midtown, the kind of place he used to take her when he wanted to be seen. White tablecloths, $14 cocktails, a hostess who remembered your name because forgetting it was a fireable offense. Emma wore black, not consciously. She reached into the bag of clothes she'd brought from Brooklyn, and the first thing her hand touched was a black sweater, and she pulled it on without thinking and only realized later, catching her reflection in the elevator doors, that she looked like she'd been absorbing Lucian's palette by osmosis. Black sweater, dark jeans, her hair down for the first time in months because Elena had told her that morning, with the devastating honesty of a 4-year-old, that her hair was pretty when it wasn't in a bun. The restaurant was half empty at noon on a Wednesday. Preston was already seated at a corner table, and the first thing Emma noticed was how diminished he looked. Not physically smaller, but reduced. The expensive confidence that had once been his defining feature had been stripped away, and what remained was a man in a suit that no longer fit his circumstances, holding a menu he probably couldn't afford, radiating the specific desperation of someone whose entire identity had been built on wealth and status and who now had neither. He stood when she approached. Old habit, muscle memory from a lifetime of performing manners. Emma. Sit down, Preston. He sat. She sat across from him. Dante positioned himself at the bar, 12 feet away, nursing a water with the relaxed alertness of a man who could cross those 12 feet in under 2 seconds if necessary. You look different, Preston said. You said that at the gallery. Pick a new opening. His jaw tightened. The waiter appeared. Emma ordered coffee. Preston ordered scotch. Some things didn't change. I meant what I said in the text, Preston began. I know what your husband did to me. The federal investigation, the evidence they used, the financial records, the internal documents, none of that came from standard channels. Someone fed it to them. Someone with access to systems that shouldn't have been accessible. And the only person with both the motivation and the capability is Lucian Moretti. So he destroyed my life, Emma. Deliberately, systematically, the same way he destroys anything that gets in his way. You destroyed your own life, Preston. You committed fraud. You embezzled money from your investors. The documents the feds used were your documents, containing your crimes created by your decisions. Lucian didn't forge anything. He just made sure the right people saw what you'd already done. Preston's face darkened. You're defending him. I'm stating facts. There's a difference. He's a criminal. You know that, right? Whatever fantasy you've constructed about your marriage, whatever story you're telling yourself, the man is a criminal. He runs an organization that operates outside the law. People have been hurt. People have disappeared. And you were an honest businessman who just happened to steal $20 million from a pension fund. We all have our flaws. Preston leaned forward. His eyes were bloodshot. His fingernails, she noticed, were bitten to the quick, a habit she'd never seen in him before, a visible marker of the deterioration happening beneath the expensive suit. I'm going public, he said. I have contacts at 3 media outlets who are interested in the Moretti story, the hidden empire, the violence, the marriage of convenience to a woman who didn't know what she was signing up for. I can make your life very difficult, Emma. You already did that 3 years ago. In an apartment we shared when you told me I was fundamentally unlovable and walked out while I sat on the kitchen floor, unable to breathe. She held his gaze, didn't blink. You want to know the difference between then and now? Then I believed you. I sat on that floor and I believed every word you'd ever said about me. That I was weak, that my art was worthless, that I was lucky anyone wanted me at all. I believed it so completely that when a stranger offered me a marriage contract, I signed it because I genuinely thought it was the best I could do. Her voice was steady, not cold, not angry, just clear, the way water is clear when it's deep enough. But here's the thing about being broken by someone, Preston. Once you survive it, once you actually come out the other side, you become immune. Not to pain, not to fear, but to the specific weapon that person used against you. Your weapon was making me feel small. And I'm sitting across from you right now, and I don't feel small. I feel like a woman who has walked through things in the last 48 hours that would destroy most people, and I'm still here, drinking bad coffee in a restaurant I never liked, across from a man I no longer fear. Preston stared at her. Something moved behind his eyes, not remorse, exactly, something closer to recognition. The slow, unwilling acknowledgement that the person sitting across from him was not the person he'd left on a kitchen floor 3 years ago. I'm still going public, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. Go ahead. Tell whatever story you want. Lucien's lawyers will handle the legal exposure, and his reputation is built on exactly the kind of mystery you'd be confirming. You won't hurt him, you'll just make him more interesting. She paused. And as for me, I'm a graphic designer from Ohio who married above her tax bracket. The tabloids will run it for a week, maybe 2. Then someone else will do something scandalous and they'll forget I exist. That's how it works. You know that better than anyone. Preston looked down at his scotch, picked it up, set it down without drinking. You were different before, he said quietly. Before him. I was, and you're the reason I had to change, so thank you, Preston. Honestly. Because the woman I was when I loved you would never have survived the man I married. But the woman you broke? She's exactly strong enough. She stood up, placed a $20 bill on the table for the coffee, looked down at the man who had once been the axis around which her entire world rotated, and felt the last filament of connection between them. Not love, not even hate, just the stubborn residual electricity of shared history. Go dark. Goodbye, Preston. She walked out. Dante fell into step behind her. The autumn sunlight hit her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk, and she stood there for a moment, eyes closed, breathing the cold midtown air, and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Light. Not happiness, exactly. Not relief. Something more fundamental. The feeling of a weight being removed that you'd carried so long you'd forgotten your body existed underneath it. She went home. Not to Brooklyn. To the penthouse. When she walked in, Lucien was sitting on the floor of the living room with Elena, helping her build a tower out of wooden blocks. He was still wearing the clothes from yesterday, the smoke-stained shirt, the dark trousers, and his scrubbed raw knuckles looked almost grotesque against the small, brightly colored blocks. Elena was giving instructions with the imperious confidence of a tiny general, and Lucien was following them to the letter, placing each block with surgical precision where his daughter pointed. He looked up when Emma entered. Read her face the way he read everything, quickly, completely, missing nothing. How did it go? He asked. It's done. Done how? Done. Finished. Closed. He might still go to the press. He might not. Either way, I said what I needed to say, and I walked out on my own legs, and I don't care what he does next. Lucien studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Not approval. Recognition. The recognition of one survivor looking at another and understanding that the battle they just fought was the kind that leaves no external marks but changes the architecture of the person forever. "Papa, you're not paying attention," Elena said. "The blue one goes on top." "My apologies," Lucian said gravely, and placed the blue block on top. Emma sat on the floor with them. Not close to Lucian, so not yet. Not touching. Not ready for that. But close enough that Elena could reach her with one small hand and tug her sleeve to show her the tower, which was already leaning at an angle that suggested imminent structural failure, but which its architect clearly considered a masterpiece. "Look," Elena said. "It's a castle." "It's beautiful," Emma said. "It's for the dragon. He needs somewhere to live that isn't scary." Emma looked at the leaning tower, looked at Elena's crayon-stained fingers, looked at Lucian, who was watching his daughter with an expression that combined fierce pride with the particular sadness of a man who knew his hands were built for destruction and was trying, clumsily, desperately, to use them for something else. "Can I add a block?" Emma asked. Elena considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice deliberating a landmark case. Then she pointed. "The yellow one. There." Emma placed the yellow block. The tower held. 3 weeks later, Emma's paintings hung on the walls of the Moretti penthouse. Not because Lucian had arranged it, not because Castellano, recovering now, slowly, in a private medical facility, his chest wound healing into a scar that would join the story of the night everything changed, had negotiated their transport. Emma had gone to the storage unit herself, had opened the padlock with hands that shook only slightly, had stood in the narrow, fluorescent-lit corridor between rows of metal doors and pulled out canvas after canvas, each one wrapped in moving blankets she'd bought at a hardware store 2 years ago, each one carrying the dust and silence of abandonment. She'd unwrapped them on the penthouse floor while Elena watched with wide, fascinated eyes. The mixed media piece, the one Preston had called childish, was the largest. 4 feet by 3 feet, layers of acrylic and charcoal and torn paper, all blues and blacks and sudden violent streaks of gold, a painting that didn't represent anything specific but felt like drowning and surfacing at the same time. Elena had stood in front of it for a long time. Then she'd said, in her small, clear voice, "It looks like Papa." Lucian had been in the kitchen. He'd heard. He hadn't come out for several minutes, and when he did, his eyes were red and he didn't explain why. The paintings went up one by one. Emma chose the placement herself. The mixed media piece in the living room, where the morning light caught the gold streaks and made them burn. A smaller landscape, imaginary, a place that didn't exist, violet mountains above a silver sea. In the hallway outside Elena's bedroom, which had been converted from the guest room with a speed and thoroughness that suggested Lucian had been planning it for longer than he'd admit. 2 abstracts in the master bedroom, which Emma had moved into gradually, without announcement, without ceremony. First a toothbrush, then a drawer, then a slow migration of clothes and books and the small, personal artifacts of a life being transplanted. She didn't forgive Lucian, not in the way forgiveness is traditionally understood. A clean, decisive act, a line drawn between before and after. What she did was harder and messier and more honest than that. She chose, every day, to stay, to build, to occupy the same space as a man who had done terrible things to bring her close, and was now, clumsily and imperfectly, and with the desperate sincerity of someone who had never been taught how to love without controlling, trying to deserve her presence. Some mornings she woke up furious. The eviction, the manipulation, the months of hidden truth. The anger would hit her before her feet touched the floor, and she would lie in bed next to a sleeping Lucian, who slept poorly, who thrashed and muttered and sometimes reached for her in the dark with a grip so tight it left marks. And she would think about leaving. Think about the studio apartment in Brooklyn, the quiet, the simplicity. Then Elena would appear in the doorway, clutching the one-eared rabbit, asking if the dragon book was awake yet. And Emma would get up, make coffee, read the book, start again. That was the real resolution, not a grand gesture, not a single transformative moment. A daily, grinding, imperfect choice to stay in a life she hadn't chosen and was slowly, painfully making her own. Lucian rebuilt his empire. Not to its former size, the damage from the port was permanent, a scar on his financial landscape that matched the scars on his body. But he rebuilt strategically, shedding the operations that had entangled him with men like Corsetti, consolidating into legitimate channels that could withstand scrutiny. It cost him power. It cost him alliances. It cost him the particular kind of invincibility that comes from operating in the shadows without constraint. He paid those costs without complaint, because the alternative, the version of his life where Elena existed in hiding and Emma existed at arm's length, and he existed at the center of an empire that demanded everything and gave nothing, that alternative had become unthinkable. Preston went to the press. 2 outlets ran pieces, vague, poorly sourced, heavy on implication and light on evidence. They generated 48 hours of social media commentary and then evaporated, replaced by the next scandal, the next outrage, the next story that demanded the city's attention. Preston was convicted 4 months later. Financial fraud, embezzlement, 12 counts. The sentencing hearing lasted 1 afternoon, and Emma didn't watch it. Castellano returned to work with a new scar and an unchanged demeanor. He continued managing Lucian's affairs with the same measured precision, though Emma noticed he'd begun carrying a certain tiredness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before, the weight of a man who had come 2 centimeters from death and was quietly, privately, recalibrating what mattered. And on a Tuesday afternoon in November, Emma sat in the children's ward of the hospital on East 68th Street, reading to a girl named Sophie, whose older sister had died the previous spring. Sophie was 6. She had light brown hair and a gap where her front teeth used to be, and an expression that alternated between bewilderment and a sad, precocious wisdom that no 6-year-old should possess. Emma read from a picture book about a cat who was afraid of the rain. Sophie listened with the total absorption that children bring to stories, not analyzing, not interpreting, just receiving, letting the words wash over her like water. Outside the ward, 2 men stood in the corridor. One was Dante, positioned near the elevator, scanning the hallway with professional vigilance. The other was Lucian. He stood at the window of the ward watching Emma read. His hands were in his pockets. His suit was dark, immaculate, the armor he wore against a world that had never offered him anything without demanding blood in return. But his face, reflected faintly in the glass, held an expression that the billionaires and criminals and politicians who feared him would never have recognized: tenderness. Not the performed tenderness of a man trying to appear soft. The real thing, clumsy, uncomfortable, sitting awkwardly on features designed for severity. The tenderness of a man who had burned ports and destroyed empires and spent his life building walls against a hostile world, and who now stood outside a hospital room watching a woman read to a child and felt something in his chest that he still didn't have adequate words for. Emma turned the last page. Sophie looked up. "Is that the end?" Sophie asked. "That's the end." "Is it happy?" Emma closed the book, set it gently on the bedside table. She thought about the question the way she thought about everything now, without simplification, without the false comfort of easy answers. "The cat learns that rain doesn't have to be scary," Emma said, "and she finds a dry place to sleep. So yeah, it's happy." Sophie nodded, satisfied, pulled her blanket up to her chin, closed her eyes. Emma stood, gathered her things, walked out of the ward and into the corridor, where the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly and the linoleum floor squeaked under her shoes, and the man she'd married was waiting for her with his hands in his pockets and his dark eyes fixed on her face, as if she were the only point of orientation in a spinning world. "How is she?" Lucian asked. "She's okay. She misses her sister. I can arrange for..." "You don't need to arrange anything. She just needs someone to read to her. That's enough." He nodded, accepted it. This was new for him. The acceptance that not everything required orchestration, that sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was simply show up and be present and let the moment exist without trying to control its outcome. They walked to the elevator together. His hand found the small of her back. That same firm, possessive touch from the gallery, but different now. Not claiming, anchoring. The touch of a man who had learned, slowly and at enormous cost, the difference between holding on and holding together. In the elevator, descending, Emma leaned against his shoulder. Just slightly. Just enough for him to feel the weight of her against him and understand what it meant. "Elena wants to paint tonight," she said. "She told me. She wants you to teach her how to mix colors. She told me she wants you to wear the apron." "What apron?" "The one she picked out. It has ducks on it." Lucienne was quiet for a moment. I'm not wearing an apron with ducks. She's 4. You're wearing the apron. Another silence. Then, so faintly she almost missed it. Fine. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened onto marble floors and quiet security, and the muted grandeur of a building that existed to keep the world at a safe distance. Outside, Manhattan roared with its usual relentless energy. Taxis and construction, and 10 million people chasing 10 million versions of survival. The October sun was low, throwing long shadows across the sidewalk, turning the city gold and gray in equal measure. Lucian opened the car door for her. She got in. He followed. The convoy pulled away from the curb with the same fluid, predatory grace it always had, and Emma watched the city scroll past the tinted windows and thought about the woman who had stood outside a Chelsea gallery less than a month ago, gripping a glass of warm champagne, terrified of her own past. That woman was gone. Not destroyed, not erased, transformed. The way metal is transformed by fire, losing its original shape, but gaining something harder, something more resilient, something that holds its edge. She reached across the back seat and took Lucian's hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately. Tight, instinctive, the grip of a man who still couldn't quite believe the thing he was holding wouldn't be taken away. She didn't pull back. They drove home through the amber light of a New York afternoon, and somewhere in a penthouse above the city, a 4-year-old girl was waiting with a book about a dragon who learned that his fire didn't have to hurt, and an apron with ducks on it, and the uncomplicated expectation that the people she loved would walk through the door and stay. And they did.